Howdy, my name is Callum, also known as Northern Dice, and today I'm going to be reviewing Pendulum by Stonemaeir Games. Pendulum is a 1 to 5 player resource management, time management game where you are aiming to gain the throne of time by moving along tracks and gaining resources gradually. It is a very, very, very strange game in its concept, but it is one that I have really enjoyed. Just for complete transparency, this game was sent to us by Stonemaeir Games for review. We aren't being paid for any of our opinions, and all of our opinions are our own. So this is Pendulum Setup for a 3-player game. All players start on the exact same footing in terms of how they're set up. So everybody always gets 10 of each of the starting resources as a pool, and you can never have more than 10 available to you. You have your yellow cubes, which are your gold, your money. You have your red cubes, which is your military. And you have your blue cubes, which is your culture. And those are resources that you can spend in order to gain different things. And it depends on what you're trying to get, but we'll come into that later. On top of that, you've got your tracks, all 4 of them, which come in the colours linked to the resources you've got. So you have got your power, you have got your prestige, you've got popularity, I will remember these, and then you've got your grey one, which is your big achievement that you're aiming to get at some point during the game as well. And the aim of the game is to have these tracks in the paper area of the track before the end of the game. And if you are able to get all of the tracks into there, then you win. If other people also get it into there, it's whoever has got the most furthest along. And if nobody gets it into there, it's whoever's got the most in there the furthest. So an example, if you manage to get all the tracks into that zone apart from the yellow one, you would count up how many spaces across the blue and red are. The big important thing about those tracks is that if the grey one is not in there, then you cannot win. You cannot win without your achievement. The setup for players is a little bit variable in terms of what the different characters can do. And with that as well, I have got 2 of them to hand here just to have a look at. And they come with 2 sides. So you have your standard, well, bog standard side, which gives you very, very basic similar abilities to everybody else, but starting resources are different across. So as you can see, Lysenia has 0 votes to start, whereas Drenkia has 1 vote to start. With that as well, their actual need for these different tracks are different as well. And where that becomes a little bit more complicated is in that you have a reverse side to each as well, with a little bit of variation in artwork, which I do like quite a lot. But you also have different resources available to you as well, and the tracks differ ever so slightly. You'll also, if you're paying attention, which I wasn't the first time I played, notice that these symbols are different too. So Drenkia the Tyrant has a different symbol to Drenkia the Insidious. And the reason for that is because all players gain a hand of cards that they're able to play throughout the game at any point. And they are different based on the character as well. So quite commonly you will always have this card, which allows you to take a meeple off the board out of time. And I'll explain how the time management element works in a moment, but it's important to note that that allows you to remove one when the timer is there. Gain a random resource, exchange 7 military for a extra meeple, and gain a blue on the track. And it's quite common across all players to have cards very similar to that. But again, it's variable, which means that some characters won't have the card to move across the blue track, some characters won't have the random free resource, some characters won't have a need for 7 military in order to get an extra meeple. It might be a different resource. And the reason for that is to make sure that your play style is always going to be different and always going to be dynamic. Because if all the players had the exact same starting setup, the exact same starting tracks and the exact same starting resources, you would be in a position where everyone would do the exact same thing every time. This makes it dynamic and chaotic and variable, and it means that every single game is going to be very different, especially not only how you tackle it with the players that you're playing against, but also how you manage the actual abilities of the character you're playing. So once you've got your character set up, you'll have to have a look at the big main board, which is where all of the action actually happens. And it is split almost into 3 separate quadrants, with this being a part of this area here, and I'll explain what it does in a minute. But each of these different areas, the purple, the green and the black, are all dictated by the timers associated to them. And the way the game works is quite hard to explain because you are using time as a resource, which seems mad because you cannot physically have any tokens towards that, but you are managing your time. And because of that, the game is able to be played without turns. It works beautifully as well without turns. It is a constant flow. It isn't chaotic. People are just placing their meeple as necessary to the different locations to try and activate the different areas. There are some limitations in this which make it so that you have to be aware of where you're going, when and what you're trying to activate. And there's also risk of having meeple locked for certain amounts of time. And it's that management of that that makes the game so unique and interesting in my opinion. So, what you aim to do on your turn is you aim to place your meeple, which come in two flavours of big and small, on these different locations. And you'll notice the locations have large open spaces on each of them alongside an activation pool on the bottom. You'll also notice that every single area has two tracks. It has a top and a bottom, and even though the purple has got many spots on it, it's still a top track and a bottom track. What happens is, to start a round, all of the timers will be flipped, and the easiest one to do will be the black one because that one only lasts 45 seconds. And once it's flipped, nobody at all can place meeple in this bottom zone. It's currently being activated by that timer. It also means that you cannot move meeple out of this zone and elsewhere without the use of a card. But what it does mean is that any meeple that were there when that happened can then be activated for the ability. So I could move this down here to activate the yellow ability on my player card, which generally speaking across all players is to gain 2 money, 2 gold as it would be. And then gold can be spent for different things and can be exchanged in different ways. It is a very, very important resource, much like all the other resources are. But that means that that meeple is now locked, and I cannot grab them without the use of that card. Now for the black timer with 45 seconds, that's not really an issue because ideally I want to be in a position where I'm quickly going to the black and out and in and out, just trying to get as much of that stuff as I can. But the more powerful, more usable things always end up becoming green and purple. Now the green timer isn't too bad. It takes about 2 minutes to finish off, so you'll be able to split between each 2 minutes. But the purple timer is the one that dictates how long the game will last. And every time the purple timer flips, it takes 3 minutes to expire. And you only flip it 3 times. Because every time you flip it, you knock off one of these little egg timer tokens to show that you have moved past that. So it'll move from there to there, it'll expire, back to there, it'll expire, and then back down here and it'll expire. And the moment you've knocked off that 3rd timer token, the game is not ended. The round is not finished, but nobody can flip any more timers. All timers are then staying exactly where they are. You can continue to activate anything you need. You can put meeple in positions ready for the next round. And it's incredibly encouraged by the game to do so, which means that you can be very, very forward thinking and make sure you've got a plan ahead of time. And this is the one time when time isn't an actual resource to spend because everything is already in place and you are prepping for the next round. But there are so many things for you to need to do in a round that that final bit of respite is more mop up and get prepped as opposed to anything else. So I will go through each of these spots in a moment, but for the time being I just want to actually talk about how important it is to consider when your timings are occurring. Because the game comes with 2 flavour modes. You can have time as an active resource with timers being flipped constantly back and forth, with the risk that human error will mean that some timers don't get flipped as often, with the human error element meaning that sometimes, as people do, things go wrong. Or, as an alternative, you have the timer track little chart with a little grey timer, where you can go progressively down and it'll say, flip all the timers, activate everything. And when everyone's ready, you move it down, you flip the black timer, flip the black timer. And at that point, you just move across and you can almost simulate the time being the resource. Perfect for if you're trying to learn how to play the game, but by no measure is it a substitute for the active movement needed by the timers being moved. Only caution with it is, as I've said, is that if you're moving the timers, there's that human error element, and that when I flip the black timer, it is not a guaranteed 45 seconds. It takes me an extra 2 seconds. And because it all works up to the time of 3, being that one flip is 3 minutes, 6 minutes, 9 minutes, it means the green timer will only get flipped 4 times. It means the black timer will get flipped multitudes of times if you do it that way. If you aren't doing it that way, it does mean that realistically you've got the human error element where things aren't going to get flipped as often. And you can sometimes put a loss down to that, but it's one of those areas that cannot be controlled because you're increasingly giving that responsibility to people. And if I'm putting it bluntly, people are rubbish. We make silly mistakes. At the start of any round, you would be able to have your meeple in the zones you want them so long as there isn't a timer there, remembering the rule that you cannot place meeple where a timer is currently active. And then once you're ready to go and everyone is happy, you could then move the timers across. And with the purple one, we'd move down to this one and knock one of those little tokens off to show that that has been used, that part of the round is finished. Once all of those have gone, as I've already mentioned, the round finishes and everybody's able to do little bits of mop up, but timers aren't turned anymore. Anytime a timer moves into a track, you're then able to activate any of your meeple there. And in example as the blue player, I have got a large meeple there, so I am able to activate them and get the gains as long as I can pay for them. Now, not all tracks require any money, but the purple and green ones do. And these ones cost 2, which is the reason it's so important to make sure you are going to black to gain the money, etc, etc. And anytime you were to move this chap down, it would be a case of you'd pay 2, as long as the timer's there, and you would be able to gain those resources. You cannot, big emphasis, you cannot take the chap out and put him elsewhere if the timer's there. That is the golden rule of the game. Just to go through what each of these do, if we start with the middle one, the yellow and the blue allow you to move on the yellow and blue tracks respectively. It would be to play 2 coins to move up on both those tracks. Really important for lots and lots of reasons, mainly for winning. The boxes, however, work a little bit differently. And if you remember from when we looked at the player boards, they have these boxes at the bottom of them. And they come in flavours of like a military fist, a red, a blue, and a yellow, which all link to the actual things on the board. An example of this blue one and this brown one, but it should have the fist in it, of course. And when you activate those, you would gain whatever you have got on your actual list. And for the brown one, it would be moving up on the red track. For the blue one, it would be gaining 5 blue for most players, as you can see there. Now you can and are able to increase the amount of gains you get over time, but we'll come to that in a bit. But what you need to remember is that as you're going through these, you are trying to get these, and as a rule of thumb, the longer it takes you to move meeple out, the more powerful the ability. I like the fact the purple has got the longest timer because it is the biggest and meatiest of abilities. The caution with that is knowing full well that if you put people there and then you move a timer onto it, they are locked for a very long time. Other people could then be making little gains, little bits of progress, and as much as you're making big progress very quickly, if you haven't planned your resources, don't have the money, or are just not needing the things you put there, you are trapped without the use of a card to get out of there. And I think the rules could have made that a bit more explicit, but I like the fact that it is one of those time management, it's the risk you're using your time for. A little comment on how the actual meeple work. If I'm to put this chat back up here and put this back down there just to simulate it, I have got a large meeple on that zone. Large meeples, as a rule, can be placed absolutely anywhere. They're a complete free reign. Small meeples, on the other hand, cannot. They can only go where there are no big meeples. So this red one I could place here. Now the risk and knowledge with that is, if there is no big meeple, you can place your red. If a big meeple then comes along, no more small meeple can be placed. And because time is your resource you're managing, you could choose to take this chap off and place him elsewhere if it's going to be more beneficial. But then you cannot place him back there if you change your mind. Once he's been removed, it is a done deal, locked out. The other thing to note about the board is that this is the 1 to 3 player side. The 4 to 5 player side, you do not have these large boxes, they are actually separated into individual strands. So with this one, it'd just be a straight down. With this one, you get the choice. On a 4 and 5 player game, it would be directive of which one you are going to, there wouldn't be any decision making about it. Here is the green track. As with the purple one, it costs 2 to move down across there. The only difference being that the green track only takes 2 minutes to move. It can feel a very long time, but this is the one where you are able to gain the red box's benefit, which is going to be military as a cube resource. The yellow track can be moved twice along. This allows you to just straight up gain the red track again, but this, which I haven't talked about yet, is your votes. And your votes are gained very progressively, and you need to aim to get the most by the end of the round to effectively win the round. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll win the game, but it means you'll get the best advantages at the end of the round. And we'll have a look at that in a moment as well. And then here is the black track. The black track is the one where the rules don't actually count. As you can see from these little meeple symbols, you can place anybody there, as many as you want there. It only takes 45 seconds, and those are very quick and easy gains. You gain the yellow box, you gain a vote, you gain any resource of your choice, and if you have anytime a card or something else that's got a different number on there, you can have a mix and match of those. The only difference here is this one, which allows you to gain map tiles. Now, maps work really, really interestingly because you are able to pick up maps very, very easily by spending 4 military on that spot. You'll notice they have got different symbols as they go around. That associates to what location they will be placed and what reward you will gain from them. So, in example with this one, you could buy that and place underneath the different box symbols on your player card to gain that resource when you activate that box. You can have as many of those as you want there, but when you get to the second phase of a round, the council phase, you have to have reduced down to 2 by the end of it. So it's worth noting that as much as you can cash in with loads of those, you might not keep them all every single round. The final area of the actual main board is the achievement zone. Now this bit links directly to council phase, and I'll come to that when we get to there, but this bit is what you are aiming to do each round in order to claim that achievement and move your little grey token up on your track. Now you need to do this once per game in order to be able to claim victory over the whole thing. And what it does is it says what you need and what you can get. So an example of this one, you need 4 prestige, 4 gold and 3 votes. You just need to physically have them on your board. And if you physically got them, you can say, I've got it. You pick up your token, you place it on that first spot to show that you've done it. And then you've got 2 choices. If the achievement star, this little metal thing, is there, you can claim that, move it onto your board, and in the council phase, or immediately if you should so choose, move up on the grey. And that will allow you to be able to win the game at the end. Alternatively, if you don't need that, or you don't want it, or you've got something more pressing, you can take that reward. It's important that you announce to everybody that you've done it, because multiple people might do it at the same time, and you don't want to all be scrambling over the same resource. This changes every single round, and again, it is something that you need to do in order to be able to win the game. I will talk about this very, very briefly. On this side, we've only got 3 spots. In a 4 and 5 player game, you'd have 4 and 5 player spots. And this identifies what reward you will get for having the most votes at the end of the round. If you have got the most votes, you will go to the top. If you have the least votes, you will go to the bottom. If you have the middle votes, you have this middle. And if you have a tie, the lowest ranking player breaks the tie as the winner. So in example, if red and green were tied, it would be that green will go to the top, not red, which always gives you that advantage of at least you have got the underdog advantage. And it just means that in a first player position, you'll be able to get 1 reward card and move up on 2 tracks. Second place, 1 reward card, move up on 1 track, and last place, just 1 reward card. And those are all parts of the council phase. Just some final little details to be aware of in terms of your player board. These are the gains that you gain from those boxes, with that being just a single resource, 4 military, 5 prestige, 2 gold. These little numbers are your starting resources. That's just a little reminder that you start with a big and a small meeple. You have 2 meeple on the side that you can gain by playing these cards. That's the one that allows you to move a person off of a timed zone. That's the one that allows you to buy a new person. And as you gain those reward cards, they also go into your hands. And at any point on your turn, if you have got 5 prestige, those little blue ones that'll sit there, you can spend those 5 to refresh your hand, because as you play these, we always play them to this area so that we know that they are done with. You keep the rest in your hand, to your side, whatever. These little these little province cards, when you gain them, always just get tucked straight under. which with my table is not easy, but there you go. So that would be an extra on the military track. That would be 2 votes when you gain military, 1 vote, and of course 1 blue. It does seem to be a common trend that yellow will always give you gold, blue will always give you prestige, red will always give you military. But there are some that give you a variant, an example of this one that allows you to gain military on any of those, but then you gain more military from the blue one, which then makes the blue boxes a lot more valuable, but those are on the purple timer, which means that you've got to wait longer for them. It's a very well thought out game in terms of making you wait and use that time as a resource really cleverly. But I think from the outside, people look at this as just a game of waiting because you are always waiting for that timer to be flipped. And because of that, it does make it a little bit, I don't know, disheartening, because I've got a lot of love from this game. A lot of love for this game since I was able to review it. But it doesn't always sit well with some people when you say it's real time, because real time games, generally speaking, most people default to things like Mousetrap or Pass the Bomb or something else that's quite, I don't know, quite generic compared to this where you're using time as the resource. And of course, when you say that as well, people say, so where are the time tokens? And it's knowing that time is not a physical resource, but you're managing your time. For me, I love this. The actual variant side where you're playing as the more complicated characters, I do think holds a lot of merit, but I think it does make it quite messy as well. With that, you do get some little cards in the actual game box that explain how to best use these, which I think is very, very clever. And of course, it does also add in a lot of risk because you've got a lot more to manage, because no longer are these tracks just moving across to gain you that win. They're also a resource because you've got to spend 2 to be able to gain that, which seems mad. You're removing your end goal backwards in order to gain those. There's a lot more risk management to it, and it's rare that when we play with the advanced side that we ever actually get into this papyrus zone with all of the tracks. You'll also have noticed that the tracks are also a lot longer. So it is a bit swings and roundabouts. If you're looking for that big meaty challenge, this is that, but definitely not for a good couple of games. Even for us, we still struggle with this side. It does also come with a different set of cards, as identified by the fact that the card backs and that match differently. But again, that's more in terms of working with a play style. This is going to tie you down a lot more than this one. This one will give you a fair bit more freedom in terms of how you will choose to approach and win Pendulum. So once the last purple timer token has been knocked off, everybody then has the ability to just polish off what they're doing. No more timers are flipped, but everyone is able to at least get things into position, activate anything they need, use any untimed actions. And then you would move to the council phase. And the council phase is how you sort of identify who was the winner of that round and establish what sort of reward people can get. The way it works is that you identify who is in first place, second place, third place by the basis of most votes. You get the reward cards. You check the maximum number of province cards that you can have. These ones that you can have at the bottom of your reward boxes, your restock bits. The next round is set up, and then you place and move any people if you want to as an option. Of course, that's just what it says. I'm used to the muscle memory, and it is a case of that you would identify who's in what position, gain the rewards, and then move on. Now, the rewards are pretty standard across, that you have, I think it's 30 available, and you get rid of, 30 available, and you get rid of 10, so it's a bit random each time. And they come in 2 flavours. You can have instant effect ones, which are these lightning bolts, which are instant effect, or these sun ones, which go into your hands with the cards that you gain as part of your player, these ones. And they can then be played during your turn. And they do very unique things and make you quite dynamic. It stops you being variable and more like a built character, but it's never that big a change. It's more of a, I need this, so I'm going to. The only card that's different on that, that's always there, is this one, which allows you to swap out one of your little meeples for the big meeple. So you can have 2 big meeple, and then as time goes on, by spending those other resources from your cards, you can also get another 2 each. So you could have 4 meeple on the board. But you can only have 1 person per round do that, and if someone chooses to do that, you would then flip it, until the next round. People choose their rewards. Any that aren't chosen get picked up, discarded, new ones are dealt. With the exception of the final ones, which are always a standard. And they are, well, almost like a saving grace in some capacities, because this allows you to exchange 10 random resources for achievement if you weren't able to get it, some last minute gains on those tracks, or one on each track. It's that last little gambit to try and make it so you can get past the finishing post and be in with a chance of winning. Not necessarily always a guarantee, but at least something you can put in place to help you win. Once all that's done and dusted, everyone places their pieces, everything's reset up, and the game just goes again. It's surprising how pacey the game is, to say that with time being your resource, you can spend a lot of time sitting and waiting. Now, when I say waiting, don't anticipate that you are just sat there tapping your foot. You're always considering, always moving. And 45 seconds is not a lot of time. In the same way, 3 minutes can feel like an age. It depends on how you manage those resources, how you manage that time, and how you place your people on what sort of game you're going to have. Not necessarily in terms of engagement and excitement, but in terms of how rewarding your uses of these people are going to be. Quick tip from someone who is definitely not a pro and rarely wins: always try and get as many people out as you can straight away. Having that extra person available to you almost immediately means that you are going to be able to just start skirting across the board. And if you do have two people that are locked, you can at least keep one in the zone where you are able to have that 45-second timer just burning through quickly. So Pendulum as a game is one that I really did enjoy, genuinely really did enjoy it. I thought time as a resource, time management was a bit of a weird concept initially. I think I've already mentioned that it's one where I expected there to be tokens, where I expected it to be some level of any amount of actions you can take. But I think the twist on it being that you are literally managing your time is a very clever one. Bit of a sneaky one as well, because you're not physically getting any components for that resource, but clever in that sense that you are constantly needing to be vigilant of those timers. It works really well in ensuring that players are fully vigilant of all things at all times. And because everything is constantly simultaneous, as I've already said in many of my other reviews, it's an instant winner for me. With that said, I think the learning curve for Pendulum is steep. You need to really, really understand the risks and needs of the game in order to win, because there are a lot of different moving elements within for it all to just come down to how far on a track you are. And it isn't even how far on the track you are or furthest, it is how far you are into a track up to a certain point. And if you aren't past that point, then you are really stuck. First couple of games we played, nobody managed to get all 4 tokens in the track, and then when someone did, it was only that person, so it was a no-brainer on who'd won. Because we weren't fully aware when we played of all of that logistical ruling, all we knew that was we needed to get the achievement one. We were sort of a little bit stumped in terms of how the scoring actually worked. And again, with that variability, it also meant that certain characters seemed a little bit more obvious to choose, because some resources are easier to gain, you've got more time available to gain them, the timers run quicker, so you're more likely to be able to move up those tracks quickly. But on the flip side of that, it also then limited how you could play. We do completely understand the reason why you need to have variable player powers, because it would just be a case of everyone going for the exact same strategy every time. There's no real chaos available, it is just the fastest person to streamline that technique in order to win. Because it's variable, you've got different amounts of setup, different cards you can use, different needs on tracks. It means that you need to be a little bit more dynamic in what you're doing. But because when we did the rules, can't lie to you, we didn't read the endgame scoring, we just assumed it was closest to that track, and the parchment on the end was, aesthetic extra. It was a bit of a shock, but I guess because when you explain the rules as someone who knows it, you're able to explain it better. You've also got that nice little option of using the manual track as opposed to timers. You are at least able to give people that real flavour of how it works. That said, we have played a couple of games with the actual manual timer versus the timers, and as much as you do get more scope to do all the things you want to do, I almost feel like it's that human element, that risk, that little bit of error that makes the game so interesting. Because it almost feels like you're at a stock market shouting at people to turn timers, to move things, to get things going, and it makes it very exciting. And then also when you're sat there waiting for that timer to turn whilst everyone else is thinking, you can see the cogs whirring in their heads. That makes it really exciting as well, because when that timer's flipped, your actions will come into play and your big plan will come into fruition as well. I do feel the advanced mode is a big step up again as well. As much as I've said the core game has got a steep learning curve, the advanced mode is massively steep. The variability is just cranked up to 11 to the point where it almost feels a little bit asymmetrical at the start. And because you are so variable, it's almost like you cannot add any flavour of what you would like to do into that character as well. To make sure that that actually works with players, we always try and deal that as randomly as possible, because otherwise everyone always choose the one that they know that they will work best with. If you are playing a game and you're always going for the same strategy, all you're doing is having an exercise in competing with other people's strategies. You aren't dynamically changing what you're doing. So that's just one thing I will say on the advanced mode. The 2-player mode, you have a dummy player which has pieces on the board and you automatically give them 3 votes to determine player order, but that's all they do. It's more of a hindrance than anything, but at the same time it makes it a little bit tighter so that you've not got free reign, because you are placing their big meeple out to stop you from getting certain spots, which then means it's only your big meeple that can go there. 3-player and up is definitely the crowning point of the game. 5 players can be a bit messy at times, but it works and it's excellent fun, but it does become a little bit tighter, especially when you've got hands going all over the boards. It almost feels like you've got to strategically try and get over the board to get like a crane grab effect going to get your pieces and move them. 3 is fantastic. 4, yeah, brilliant. 5, tiny bit messy. 2, I don't mind. Aesthetically, the game is wild. Screams fantasy. It's got these characters where you can play as a dragon with a staff, you play as a griffin, you can play as like this big high noble elf, but you're all trying to do the same thing. They do have a little bit of a narrative to it where the King of Time is dead and you're trying to go for the throne, and it all seems to just be a bit random, bit mad, as I've said, but it's lovely and it looks gorgeous. The artwork is stunning. It's very, very, very fantastical. The boards themselves are really, really durable and thick. The cards, excellent. Little plastic tokens are brilliant. I have seen some comments when I was looking up some, just 1 or 2 of the advanced player mode comments on explanations for rules. But anyway, some people really don't like the player boards because they are like almost a sandpapery feel, quite rough and gritty. And they've had big ooh-ah about whether that is a good material to have used, but I love it. I like the feel of how solid and rigid it is. I like the fact that when I put my plastic token on, it stays there. There's less chance of me knocking it, because this is one of those games where if you do knock your playboard and everything skitters across, you are going to have to almost either bow out or trying your hardest to remember is going to be impossible with all the things that are happening so dynamically. So yeah, I do feel like it's a fantastic choice of material. One thing I have noticed, for those people that don't like it, completely outside of the review, the little plastic tokens have got 2 different materials on either side. It's got a smooth side, which allows it to flow really nicely across that sandpaper grit feel, and the other side's a little bit rough, and it almost gives it a little bit of grip and traction. Not enough to stop you from, knocking it and making it explode and go everywhere, but enough so that it does feel a little bit more satisfying to move across as opposed to slide, because it's got that extra bit of, it's got that lack of movement, should I say. Anyway, back to it. The cubes, really, really just standard cubes, but the fact that they are little cubes instead of tokens I like. In fact, the only cardboard component that I actually found was the 10 counter for the votes, and we very rarely used that. And when we did, it was more just because we needed 10. All the components I found were phenomenally developed and created. Only thing I will say, egg timers in themselves have a fault where when you flip them over time, some sand can get stuck. We had 1 or 2 games where the 2-minute timer didn't turn for most of the game because we're so intently going with it. It took us a while to notice. We've also untapped it and suddenly the sand started flowing again. But maybe you could use an app. Maybe there are different ways around it. I'm not sure. It wasn't something that we saw as massively detrimental, because after that had happened, we just need to be a little bit more vigilant of those timers getting stuck. In terms of replayability, as I've already mentioned, the actual variable player powers makes it so that you've got to play differently every time. Advanced mode gives you that scope as well. Not sure whether you would have reasonable scope to play an advanced player against a normal player. We've not tried it, but it does look like it could happen. It just means one player on the advanced mode is going to be, putting it bluntly, a bit of a disadvantage, because that complexity and the increase in need make it a lot more difficult. And if you're playing with someone who's playing I'd like to say vanilla, but it's not, but a basic player power where they don't have all the bells and whistles to their character, and they are able to just go with it and use those tracks as necessary as opposed to resources, maybe they're going to have that massive advantage, but maybe that's just a free choice you've got. I liked playing as all the characters. It didn't feel like anybody was unbalanced. The advanced players were so spread out in terms of what they could do. That did feel very imbalanced, but at the same time it didn't mean that they were going to guarantee a win because they still needed lots of things to get. I guess the imbalance is more in terms of what they needed as opposed to one character just seemed like the dummy option to take and guarantee a win. But I guess that then again depends on your playstyle and which track you're going to be more willing to wait for. If you're quite patient and are able to get those characters, those meeple out quickly, you might have some in the purple and some in the black, being able to rotate that black quickly. Or if you're less patient, you might just be trying to hit little things really hard and have one meeple collecting all the big things gradually. All very, very viable strategies that we have tried, but I didn't actually see any point where we thought we had exhausted the game's possibilities. The only thing to note with this game is that there isn't a lot of player interaction at all. You will be playing almost your own little game, and as much as you're interacting with your meeples and placing them and stopping other people from going to places, it's incredibly unlikely that you'll ever do that out of malice. You're more likely to do it out of convenience for you and it accidentally screws someone else over. If you are trying to do it out of malice, then, well, it's probably not the game to be doing it. Those meeple are such a valuable resource gainer that if you're going to waste time putting it somewhere where you don't need the things, you are likely to lose. In the same way, if you've got time to be looking at other people's boards and establishing what they need, unless they're verbalising it to you, well, again, you're probably going to lose because you're spending so long not concentrating on what you need. It did feel incredibly tight from round to round as well. There wasn't a single time where we played it and it felt like in round 4 one player was just the clear-cut winner, because there are opportunities as you go through the game to gain more and more. And it is a build-up. You do start to gain things. As you gain provinces to your bottom tracks, as you move up the tracks, as you gain more resources, as you gain those reward cards as well, you're able to increasingly change how you'll be able to play the game from round to round and eventually be in a solid position to just do whatever you want freely to just move those tracks quickly. But from rounds 1 to 3, for example, it might be the preparation and getting into that position in the first place. You, as I've said, you aren't likely to interact with other players apart from possibly verbally. Maybe sometimes you will accidentally screw someone else over. The only one where I can actually see is where you're trying to go for the achievement token and somebody else gets it, but there is the option where you could play it so that someone could take it twice just to be a bit of a problem. Nobody's ever going to do that though, because once you've got that achievement token, you're focusing entirely on your other tracks, because again, if you're then focusing on screwing someone else over anything else, you are going to lose because you aren't focusing on what you need. And would I recommend it? And I think I would. This was a bit of a weird one because I'm used to Stonemaeir Games always just being a smash out hit, and this is one that I did really enjoy. But it is one where I can see what people are saying. Some folk have said that they don't enjoy the time management element. They don't enjoy time as a resource, they don't like waiting, and I can see that. I can see why it would put some people off. It hasn't put me off though. I really enjoyed having the opportunity to think through my moves, play simultaneously, have that really active, dynamic movement, being able to manage my time best for me, ignoring what anyone else is doing, knowing full well that if they are wasting their time, that's down to them. Analysis paralysis is not a thing in this game. There is only one time when you can have that, and that's during the council phase, and realistically you can already be establishing who's where, putting things into place, and knowing what you're going to do next. It is a very short-lived game compared to some others because the timers dictate how long things can take, but it also is one that is quite easy to introduce to people. Despite that incredibly high learning curve, you can quite easily play a single round using the manual timer and then move on to timers gradually. That's what we did to teach our friends, and it worked really well because they were able to visually see it. Learning it completely fresh with no background on it was a bit of a uphill climb for us, which is the reason I say it's such a learning curve. But that said, it's still an enjoyable game regardless. We haven't got negative memories about it. But I can completely see why time management would put people off. And does it mean that it's a game I wouldn't go to choose? No, I would go to choose and I would recommend it. I just know full well that it's not something that people are used to. And maybe that combined with the very fantasy-esque arty theme that doesn't actually equate to anything, along with the actual fact that you're using egg timers in a modern board game will throw some people. For me though, I'd recommend it. I've really enjoyed reviewing Pendulum, and if you are looking for a game that has got something quite unique to it in terms of time as a resource, if you're looking for something with a little bit more, immediate play, if you're looking for a game that's quite strange in the fact that you don't have player turns, I'd recommend this. As always, thank you ever so much for sticking around for this review. I will catch you next time.